Create that life, legacy designers. Amber Prosia here. Welcome to episode number 10 of the Parenting Biz Podcast, coming to you every single Monday. Now let's chat with this week's featured guest, Louise Fitzgerald-Baker. Lou, are you ready to educate us on your journey of how you constructed the life you've always wanted for yourself and your family?
Yes, Amber, I'm ready to go.
Amazing. Lou, the pink hard hat lady, is a busy wife, mother of 3 daughters, and built a career in the construction industry before turning her attention back to training and coaching. She set about putting the necessary measures in place to ensure her home was protected and her daughters had their own blueprint for life, love, health, and business. She has written a book on it called The Pink Hard Hat, Building the Resilient Woman. And now she coaches and trains women all over the world to apply the same principles so that they too can build and insulate their lives. Lou's goal is to inspire, coach, and equip women to lead financially confident lives so that they can be resilient in the face of change. Lou, please take a minute and fill in any gaps from that intro and give us a little glimpse of your own personal life.
Thank you, Amber. I have been a property developer for the last 10 years, and that was where the metaphor really came from. Because when I go onto a building site, I wear a hard hat. And just as you do, that will insulate what's important. A high-vis vest to protect and also remain visible, and steel-capped boots that are also about protection but give you the confidence to walk wherever you need to go. So collectively, they became the metaphor I use to tell a story to women about generational resilience and how we're bringing up our daughters particularly to live in today's world and construct the life that they're looking for.
Amazing. And if you don't mind, what does resilient mean to you?
Resilience is the capacity to bend and not break under pressure. So a lot of times when people talk about resilience, they talk about the ability to bounce back. But if anyone's been through an interruption or a traumatic event, often you can't go back, Amber. You can't necessarily go back to who or what you were before. It's about walking forward. And sometimes that will look and feel differently to who and what you were before. And so in any recovery or even just getting out of a slump, it's about how do we take you forward in life's journey in a positive and constructive way.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lou. Thank you so much for being on the show. We are so excited to have you here today. And as you are aware, our listeners are parents or parents to be that realize ownership is key to not only to our parenting or business, but in life in general. And along that parenting journey, we can lose sight of that. However, if we focus on life as a game or an activity or a sport, not only can we learn to let go easier, but we can also gain strength from our mistakes and design our core focus to be one of laughter, joy, and most importantly, having fun, just like a 5-year-old kid in the sandbox. So this week, our entire interview will be manufactured around a construction building site. So welcome to our site, which is called Building the Resilient Human Being. Now, as you all are aware, this is just an analogy, and we can create and design our lives any way we want. Now, Lou, this was your chosen activity, so let's go through your daily performance and how you make it work with your life and expertise. And let's start that off with the planning and the blueprints, because we are the architects of our own lives. So how is it that we understand why we do what we do? You know, for example, why did you get into the construction industry or property development for that matter? Was it a passion or was it just human nature, the next step on the road that you were living at that time?
That's a really good question, Amber. To be honest, each time I had a child, I reinvented myself and my relationship with money and work changed. And you'll find that as you go through life and have to negotiate the work-life balance and how you run a life and a lifestyle, then that will happen. So for me, it was about a slow progression forward. And I began originally working, like many people, as an employee. And then I began to have children and I thought, oh, this isn't necessarily working for me anymore. I want to go into my own business. And as I did that, I got a taste of part-time work. And then that was also great. It gave me a level of security for a fixed amount of time. But then I thought, no, this is not getting me to where I need to be. And beyond that, I got into consulting work where I got to set the pace and I also got to set the fees. And that was fabulous for a period as well. But then that capped out because I was limited by my own capacity, by how many hours I got to bill. And then eventually I got into performance-based pay. So the attraction for me with property development was about having an opportunity to live a bigger life, if I'm really honest, and skip ahead to an environment where I could actually be paid for an outcome, not just time.
And that's massive, because it sounds like all along you were actually doing it for an end goal, a bigger picture. You want it more in life. You were just reinventing yourself for whatever the circumstances that may have been at that time. Do you feel now that you've actually, what you're doing day to day at this moment is actually more passion related, or is it still working towards your bigger goal?
Oh, it's definitely passion related, Amber. So I'm probably a little older than some of your audience. My girls are now 18, 16, and 13, and they're beginning to build their own lives. So a lot of what I'm doing now is has altered from a real physical presence in their life to one where I can step back and play a different role. And honestly, as you're getting closer to 50, which is really where I am, you start to look differently about your role and your legacy and what you're bringing forth. And so for me, having been in property development for 10 years, it was a great industry for me and did a lot, but I just, it was very masculine. It was a very masculine energy, and it was an environment where you had to be and respond a certain way, which worked really well for me. But I got to a period where I thought I need to step back and do something different now. And I'm really returning to my original roots, which is all about communication and teaching and coaching and enabling others to have the same fluid experience of both money and work that I've enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. And with your girls at that age, and honestly, there's definitely going to be listeners that are in the same age gap as you right now that are saying, I hear you. I'm finding myself, now that my kids are out, and now who am I, and they're reinventing themselves at this point. Um, while you were reinventing yourself all along, but now actually from where you stand, what advice would you actually give your girls? Because this is where they begin and architect their design and blueprints for their entire life. What advice would you be sharing for them for where they're at?
Yes, it's interesting we talk about that. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and so I've had an opportunity to reflect on progress over the generations. And in regards to where our kids are at, they're obviously in a much more technologically advanced world than the one that I grew up in. I remember when the internet came into my office, and that was 1995. We had a meeting in Parliament House in the Northern Territory, and it was a decision around what do we do with this? And does everyone get internet, or do we just have coming to one guy and everyone can go to him and ask questions and he can give us the answers? And I remember they said, you know what? I remember we had the same conversation about telephones.
Yeah.
And now everyone's got one. And true, in my lifetime, I've seen massive leaps and bounds in terms of technological advances. But it's a double-edged sword. And I mean, the world that our kids are living in, everything's going to be faster and more instant. We've obviously got electric cars. They're going to become driverless. There's going to be voice-activated robotic interchanges. You're going to have the ability to sit down and your mood will be assessed and music will be played. So there'll be an environment for our kids that we almost can't imagine now. And it's so different. There's so many opportunities for the children of today and tomorrow that we didn't have. But the flip side of that, and this is what I say to my girls all the time, it's about stay connected. Stay connected to people and information that builds you up. Because looking at life through through an iPhone is not necessarily the most valid way of streaming information. There's a real gloss in the way that information is presented, and that can cause a lot of questions for kids today that we didn't necessarily have to deal with when I was growing up.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought in, AI functionality and everything else, because it is true. Technology is definitely going to take over our world. It already has started, but yeah, and it's adapting and growing and immersing and enjoying, but also, like you said, stay connected, which leads us to my next section, which is the foundation, because I think that's a great way with our foundation. We're pouring the concrete and we're letting our creation unfold. So, as we're developing a building or watching one get developed, the foundation is the element that's going to withhold the structure together. It's the setting the base, it's forming the expectations from the ground up. How has expectations and relaying, so aka communicating, your expectations to the teams involved that affect your success levels? And that could be even at home as well, right? Especially with that growing your children along the way.
I think in property development, it's a great metaphor for all of this because it's quite true. You've got to get the design and the foundations correct. So as a boutique property developer over the years, I rarely had the budget to compete with a lot of the bigger players. And so the way I worked was I had to be a lot smarter. And the way I did that was in my design. And I would spend months and months and months getting the actual design right so that at the back end, my project would stand up comparably well with whatever else was coming onto the market. And I think it's that same foresight you need in any business. You need to be thinking about where and how do I add the most value? So, for instance, I can't compete necessarily on price because I'm a boutique property developer. So I have to be more considered in what and how I create a living space for the people that I was trying to attract. And so I was really mindful of my market and what I did better than everyone else. I took what you might see as a disadvantage, which was my size, and then flipped it around and said, well, actually, I only ever do one project at a time, and I take all my time, care, love, and attention. I put it into one project. So how can I bring that across in the way that I'm marketing and messaging that out there? And without exception, my buyers came to me for that reason. They would walk through and they'd say, I don't know, you seem to have thought of everything. There's something about this place. And so I didn't pretend to play on the same platform as everyone else. I took what I did well and then telegraphed that as this is my point of difference and this is who and what I am. And I knew clearly what I was and just as clearly what I wasn't.
And that's so brilliant because there was so actually like in that little paragraph that you just mentioned there, it was so many actual keys that you can take into life because you were clear on what you want. You also laid out your strengths. You know, you didn't compete with other people that was outside. You just focused on what you were great at and how can you relay that message, and like you said, telescope that so it's just expand and radiate your excellence, which is amazing. And not only that, you're actually sharing it with your family too, because the fact that you only focused on one project and put your heart and soul in that ability to focus is huge, especially nowadays with technology. You know, everyone thinks multitasking is a great thing. No, actually, focus is. You know, and it's, you know, I really say multitask is a myth because, and I was one of them. You know, I thought I was great at multitasking. Not at all. It's actually focus and productivity and narrowing that down. But your girls get to watch that and they get to see that and they get to see how you got to transform and take that, you know, what you may have said as a weakness or, you know, only ability to focus on one project as an absolute strength and magnify it, which is
That,
phenomenal.
that's right. And that's not to say for all your listeners out there, particularly if you're juggling with small children, the reality is in any given day, you are juggling.
Yeah.
You know, once these kids come along, it is a juggle. I did all this and built this business in school hours, and yet you know it was constantly a trade-off. When I did my first project, I had a 1.5-year-old. I took her along to the first inspection and she was with me as I signed that contract, and each time I did a launch of a project, all my daughters would be part of it. So the reality is, while you might say in business, this is who I am and this is who I'm not, and this is what I will do and this is what I won't. On any given day, as a working mum particularly, you are going to juggle. And so one of the apprenticeships I say to my girls is learn to juggle. And that isn't divide your focus, but you recalibrate in terms of what multitasking might look like. So it says in this period of time, I'm giving my sole focus to my work. And then just as seamlessly, I now have a home office, so it's an appendage to my house. And when I'm here, between the hours I'm working, I'm focused.
Yeah.
And then as I walk into the other environment, I became mum again. And that's where I switch on and become someone different. So there is an element of multitasking in terms of wearing, I guess, multiple hats in any given day. And when you're on, and you give all your time, care, and attention to who you are in that moment. And then just as seamlessly, there is an element of being able to switch into someone or something else. I think that's our reality today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's well said. Absolutely. And this kind of leads into the next question I have for you, because after the foundation has been poured, so it's fully set in, do you do anything to maintain it or ensure the rest of the project runs smoothly from there? So for example, like any rituals or habits that you have to ensure that the expectations from the ground that you have set, that they're maintained, because a lot of people, there's a lot of strays could happen. What would you recommend to keep things focused, as you said, or juggling the different multiple hats? Because as a property developer, you would have multiple different hats.
The truth is, a lot of the time in the businesses that I've come from, and many of your listeners will relate to this, the reality is before you even though we're using the analogy of the concrete being poured, once the concrete is poured in this metaphor, you're already on a certain track. So you can't turn around, you can't go back. You have to just move forward in the quickest time possible because time is money. And so then it's about seamless, concise communication and making sure that all disciplines are enrolled. So in the metaphor we're using, that might be multiple engineers and subcontractors, and you're managing multiple people, and it's really streamlining data and information so that everybody knows what small component they are in charge of and when they have to come in and when they have to go out, much like a play. And that is because the concrete's already in, the foundations have already been laid. In actual fact, once the concrete's poured, you've already done a lot of groundwork. But the reality is, if you step right back, the true strategic flexibility comes even before that, and that's about when you are designing a project and thinking carefully. Then you are basically you are you have strategic imperatives, and so you might have an exit strategy. So for anyone who's looking to do a project or commence a business, you want to make sure that all your plans are in place and you have a get out of jail free card. So there's that last chance at which you go, do I continue, do I proceed, or do I turn around?
Yeah, beautiful. I love the getting out of a jail free card. It's a great way of looking at it. Let's move into the next element, which is weather, because weather actually is pretty powerful in itself, but it represents also a season of our life, and it could be how long a property takes to get developed, and during that time there might be small to long-term sacrifices to have that ultimate dream of what we're going for, of why we've started this in the first place. So not only does weather affect our construction site, but it actually has a lot to do with how we react to little sprouts of rain or massive downpours, right? So, how would you recommend to increase our resilient capacity to be either more prepared or able to shift our concentration on what we can control?
I've written a book, obviously, The Pink Hard Hat, Building a Resilient Woman, and a lot of that is about how do you recover your position quickly. In the event of a massive interruption or where you might be blindsided in a situation you could never have seen or envisaged, then how do you quickly recover, rebound, and actually get back up again? So there is a lot to that in regards to mindset and focusing on the solution, reviewing your options and making a decision to actually move ahead. It's a bit like I was saying before, Amber. There's so much to that in being able to not just bounce back, but to bend and not break. And so if you're in business or you're juggling, you've got multiple balls in the air, it's about knowing that you're going to have in any business good and bad days, and it's about having the wherewithal to keep yourself strong. And that's mentally, emotionally, physically, social, spiritually, and financially. So that's about not being afraid to take on challenges and push past your comfort zone, and really failing forward in any pursuit that you do undertake, because you're never going to get it perfect and right all the time. And emotionally, it's about staying connected, as I said earlier, to something that lights you up and gives you life and gives you a sense of purpose beyond maybe what you're doing even now. Physically, it's about nourishing your body and getting the basics right. And I see this all the time with women where they put everyone else's needs ahead of their own, and sometimes to their own detriment. And often I have to say, what have you done for yourself today? And many a time, that honestly, the women in my life can't recall the last time they sat down and it really gave them a moment for self-care. And socially, it's about having networks around you, because obviously there's a correlation they've seen between your ability to recover your position and those that have strong social networks, whether it be sporting groups or church groups or family or just a good set of friends, that if you stay connected, those people can be absolutely such a blessing to you. I mean, in good times and in bad. And then lastly, obviously, a sense of purpose. If you have a purpose that is carrying you through, that then you can weather a lot of storms. You can almost not feel the rain as it as it comes down, and it might be impeding others. But when you know where you're going and why you're here and what your contribution is, and you're really clear on your purpose, then honestly, it can rain, it can pour, it can hail, and you've still got that capacity to continue.
Yeah, beautifully said. That's a great synopsis for that element. I'm going to go into the next element called income, because income is a huge driving factor for many people, especially in the construction industry. Take FIFO, for example. It's an addicting lifestyle. For FIFO, for the audience that doesn't know what that is, it's fly in, fly out. So they're on a roster job. So 3 weeks on and 1 week off, or 4 weeks on, 1 week off, for example. It's very popular here in Australia. But it's an addicting lifestyle because it's usually high pay, and then they also have that week off as well, that sometimes they're even getting paid for that week off. But that also has a tendency for getting people into the habits of living beyond their means, because that FIFO role may only be a few week swings or a couple month swing, or until that project's over. It could be a year or 2 years. But then they have to go back to that, because the expenses that they've purchased, they won't get that into the city, for example. Have you noticed that this is the case, and how does it affect the moods around the site?
The debt cycle is a big one, Amber. I can't talk about that enough. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, particularly with young people. So the banks often have policies where they have saving accounts while children are in schools, and as soon as those kids hit 18, they are often sent a credit card, and this beautiful shiny card arrives in the mail, and that is the key to their financial freedom. For many people, they think, great, I'm off. And if they do have that myopic short-term thinking, then it can be a real trap. Suddenly they're in a situation where they're spending, and almost without thinking, they can order goods and materials online. It can be sent to them. They can have that sense of instant gratification, and then they're paying for it with 22% interest, and that nooses around their neck for years and years to come. And that cycle, if it's not taken care of really quickly, can become quite destructive. And that's where men and women can lose their confidence and find themselves in a position where they just can't recover their position and get back up again. So income is massive. My big message, particularly to women, has been to stay connected to what's happening financially in your life. I mean, gone are the days where a man is a financial plan, and let's face it, 50% of our relationships are going to dissolve or deteriorate. And not to be negative, I love life. I'm very happily married, and I don't expect the sky to fall. Just like on a building site, I don't expect to fall off a scaffold or step on a nail. But remember, I do dress accordingly. I am wearing my hard hat and my high-vis vest and my steel cap boots. And so my message to women is, honestly, pay attention to what's happening to the finance in your life. We've won the right to work. We've won the right to participate in the workforce, but please don't let that be the end. My message is, what happens to the income beyond that? What are you a signatory for? What interest rates are you paying? Pay attention. Are you going to the accountant with your partner? And are you remaining aware of what happens to income once it comes into your home? Because unfortunately, the fastest growing homeless demographic in Australia at the moment is over 55-year-old women. And that is disturbing. Since 2011 and 12, the number of homeless women has increased 44%. And it's said that over the next 2 decades, we're going to see as many as 500,000 women come under housing stress. Now, these women may not be necessarily homeless, but they may not be living under a bridge. But what's happening is that they are disenfranchised. Somehow these women have lost connection with what's going on in their life financially. And so that is where my message is going. You know, pay attention, stay connected, have a hand in, remember, have multiple income streams, have a healthy relationship with money, and know what's going on in your life, so that down the track, you're never going to be one of that demographic who wakes up one day and says, "What just happened? What just happened in my life?" And that is something that we're seeing at the moment.
Oh, yeah, massive. And thank you so much for sharing all of that, because the statistics here, especially in Australia, are shocking. It's really, really sad. And we can do stuff about that. It's all preventable. We just have to take the time to learn, right? And
That's it.
ask for the coaches, or ask for the guidance, and it's there. It's all there for us. So how do you actually teach people who are possibly in a role, let's say in construction, for just the income, to figure out their real passion and use something that isn't their passion to get where they want to be? So I'm not too sure if you're aware of this, but Grant Cardone says it best. He literally, I don't know if you know Grant Cardone's story or not, but he was into, drugs and drink and all sorts of stuff. And then when he got out of rehab, pretty much he was like, you know what, I hate sales, but sales is going to provide to me the lifestyle that I want, so I'm going to learn how to master becoming a top sales guy. And that's what he did. So he allowed something to get him to where he wanted to go. What would you recommend to do that for a business site where their maybe only driving factor, or they think their only driving factor, is money, and that's why they're there, rather than actually looking at the bigger picture and letting that income come naturally through that larger picture of your passion?
I think with your relationship with money, it's about being the master and not the slave. So in the example we gave before, where debt is your driver, you have to actually pay down debt, then that obviously starts a whole cycle of nervous despair. And that's not the relationship with money we want. We want to be in absolute control of it so that we have a sense of abundance. And so I find in coaching men and women about money, then essentially I like to focus on that, but sometimes I have to go back to other aspects to what is your mindset around this and pair it right back. So, but in regards to money itself, and the book really does have a whole focus on money management 101, beyond generational resilience stories. I talk a lot about money, and in my case I was one of the lucky ones. I had to reverse engineer a lot of those principles because I'd almost taken for granted that my relationship with money was commonplace. But I grew up in a family that talked about money, that talked about income, that talked about debt. And so a lot of those principles were known to me. But in teaching it to other people, I had to pare that back and say, what does that actually look like? And really break it down into the real basics of money management, which is obviously earning money, saving it, and investing it, and also modeling how to celebrate it, because I didn't want to be that demographic of family or parent that basically said, I spend my whole life working, 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 and then take that to my grave and you never saw me actually celebrate or have fun with it. So they're the 4 quadrants that I work with in teaching the bare basics in terms of principles around money, and obviously we break that down. But sometimes I do have to step that back to mindset and other principles, because as much as you might like to just focus on the one pillar of resilience being what I think is financial resilience, the reality is sometimes you have to explore other aspects as well. So take a look at mental, emotional, physical, social and spiritual, so that you have a good solid foundation, like we were saying before, so to jump forward in regards to your money management.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Louise. Let's go to the next section, which is called contractors, laborers, and safety measures. And we've touched already a little bit briefly on this element, but let's just dive a little bit deeper. There's always outside variables that are outside of our control. That's just life, right? Mm-hmm. But it's very common, I find, and I could be wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but in the construction industry especially, that there's actually a lot of ego and negativity in there. How did you actually come into that force and into that element and actually handle it, to keep yourself positive and looking forward and being clear on your goal?
Ego and negativity is interesting. I probably didn't see that so much because remembering I ran my own projects. So I got to set the culture for my own projects. And in our case, it was all about vision and creating a positive point of difference. And where I suppose people might see property developers as fairly egotistical, the reality is I found it a really humbling industry, if I'm honest. And,
Great.
I was constantly reminded that you're only as good as your last deal. And really, in the industry I've come from, maybe 30% of people made money, 30% broke even, and 30% lost. And sometimes it was a most humbling surrender, because even though you think you have everything under control, you've got the Gantt charts, you've got everything processed, every element that you can under your control, the truth is you can be sideswiped at any point. And that was the lesson in property development. The 2011 floods, the subprime crisis in the US, APRA changing some of the rules about overseas lending, the borrowing from the banks. Sometimes they'll say our pre-sale requirement has gone from 20% to 140%. You think, is that even possible? That means I have to pay back all the debt plus some before I even get started on this deal. So all those variables will constantly change, and you had to be really adaptable in terms of how you responded to that in that environment. But there's only so much you could control. And there was, just like you might be if you're in the agricultural industry, where you can sow a field, but at the end of the day, if you get hit by a storm, that harvest is compromised. And it was the same in property development. And for me, I found that incredibly humbling. And I sometimes wonder how property developers do have such a reputation for strong egos. But because I did think, gosh, there by the grace of God go I, it was some of that. I was actually very fortunate. The projects I did go well, sometimes despite the conditions. But there was an element, if I'm really honest, of luck, of that.
Definitely. And you know what, though? You said it best, because you actually set that as well. You made sure you surrounded yourself with visionaries and brought on those people for the project that met your expectations. And that's where a lot of people, I think, forget about. Is what they put out there too. So I think that's really beautiful that you mentioned that. With the construction site as well, it's a high risk job, or tend to be, because it obviously, depending on the site, with so many moving parts, which is why safety is stressed. You have your hard hat on, you got your high vis, and you got your steel toe boots. But what safety measures have you put in place for your resilient, financial, independent life?
Yeah, I went into property development, I think I told you, because I had an environment. I really sought financial independence over the long term. And at the time, my husband was a soldier, or actually, he was a reporter who was a closet soldier. So periodically, he would disappear. And I remember thinking, as much as that is a noble and honourable gesture, it's a really lonely way to live a life. So I wanted to build an environment that meant that we were strong financially, and my contribution could be bigger than my time. And so really what I found over the years was property gave me an opportunity to open that door. But as I've gotten older and even wiser, I found that there's a lot, I couldn't duplicate that really easily. I couldn't turn to the women I loved and cared about and say, come with me, because the cost of entry was too high. So now what I'm doing is coaching women on many other levels, and I'm encouraging them to have a relationship with money that involves multiple streams of income. So there are so many different ways to make money these days that are not dependent necessarily on time for money, and not dependent necessarily on large risks. So whether it be online businesses, internet based businesses, network marketing, you name it, there's just a whole platform there where you can have a relationship with money that allows multiple streams of income and can shore up your position, so that you have the wherewithal and the confidence to move forward in any way, shape or form, regardless of the weather or regardless of what might come your way, whether you were expecting it or not.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's definitely one thing that I actually strongly, strongly believe in as well. That's amazing. So after the development is complete and the building site is done, the owners get the keys to the door of the property, let's say, What has been your biggest takeaways from working in this industry?
I think today's business is really all about brand marketing. So where I might have ever thought I was ever selling a property, the truth is most people were buying me. In the business that I was in, they were coming to me because they liked and trusted me, and they knew that the product they were getting was reliable, that would always value, it would value up, that it was a good and well built property. So I guess my answer on that is your brand is gold, and your reputation can only really be maintained by yourself. So if you're wanting a repeat business, and even in the industry I'm at, I was in, a large proportion of my buyers came back to me, or referral selling was massive, where people said, I trust her, because it's like anything. These days, I think, where we have more and more stimuli coming our way, we want to make sure that someone knows or has had an experience that was positive with that supplier. And that's probably the biggest lesson that I would say going forward, is that if you think you're immune from building a brand, then or referral selling won't touch you, then you're not doing business in the current market. It is all about referrals. It's all about touching base with your clients. It's all about the after sales, making sure that they are happy. And that's why, as I said, the principles laid down in the very beginning in terms of the foundations and making sure our design was right was all about having an excellent outcome at the end, because in the environment we've just come from, we knew we were building in a fairly crowded environment. So supply exceeded demand, and we had to make sure that not only we, but our product was resilient and could stand the test of time and compete well in the marketplace. So it was all about delivering an exceptional experience to our buyers.
I love that, because actually, it's really common that people only nowadays that we only focus on lead generation. So we want to get new customers and new customers, where actually, why not focusing on the existing customers and make sure that we give them that excellent outcome that we originally started with at the beginning. So I completely agree with that. If someone, Lou, is starting out and, or maybe they're just a few years into the game, what advice would you share with them?
I guess it depends on what question they're asking in terms of what they might be having problems with. But I think it does come back to your purpose. If you have a strong sense of who you are and what your contribution to the world is supposed to be, then it will keep you going in good and bad days, because you're going to have that. As any entrepreneur is going to have that. In whatever business you're doing, you're going to find you have moments where you second guess yourself, or you lose your confidence and you start thinking, am I the best person for this job? But the truth is, if you know what you're doing and why, and you have clarity of purpose, then it will keep you going through all those tough periods, because we all have them. And just as we're in a world which exaggerates the gloss, don't be fooled by that. Every single person out there running successful businesses has their moments of self-doubt or questions. But if you're clear on your purpose and why you're doing this, it will hold you true in good and bad days.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lou. So we're just going to wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to add in from today's building site development?
I think the big message to our listeners is really about living a rich life, a resilient life, and playing full out, and living and loving passionately, to have a real go, and make sure, though, that you preserve a piece of yourself before who you become next. So particularly for the wives and mothers and partners out there, I would definitely say that as you become your next chapter, don't let it subsume you to the point where you forget to take care of and nurture yourself and preserve a little piece of yourself, because that is going to be such a solid and important part of your next chapter, and your own joy in terms of being able to be great in whatever faceted role that you play. Your listeners can also, from in terms of connection, I think we said before, I'm on the pinkhearthat.com.au, and if anything that I've said has resonated with you or would for someone you care about, then I'd love it if you connected with us. And we have lots of free resources there for people too. If they're looking at their own resilience or their own insight around money management, that can be a great place for them to start.
Fantastic. And I'll actually add that into the show notes as well. So if there's any other way that people can get in touch with you, just let us know and we'll definitely put that all in there. But yeah, thank you so much. Lou, you have just dropped so many little key elements of wisdom today that I've been taking notes. It's phenomenal. So thank you so much for being on the show. Is there any other way that people can get in touch with you, or those are the top ones?
They can reach out to me through LinkedIn, Louise Fitzgerald-Baker,
Okay.
or through thepinkhearthat.com.au, or even Facebook. So any of those areas they can find me, reach out, connect. I'd love to hear more about your stories and encourage you along your way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on our show. Thank you so much, listeners. We love and appreciate you. We are all on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. Please choose your preference of platforms and subscribe and follow us. And we look forward to hearing from you guys next week. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.